First year of his first term in office, he has wanted a parade. And not just a normal parade, he wants a military parade. After Trump in his first term saw a military parade in France for Bastille Day, he said he wanted to top that. He said he wanted something bigger than that, something more like the gigantic Death Star military parades held by countries like China and Russia and North Korea. Specifically, Trump wanted tanks. He wanted tanks upon tanks rolling down the boulevards of Washington, D.C. The issue with tanks, though, is that they weigh a ton. To be more exact, American tanks weigh like 30 to 70 tons, more or less, depending on the model, which is way too heavy to roll down the streets of Washington, D.C. without destroying the streets of Washington, D.C. So in his first term, Donald Trump did not get his military parade with tanks. But he did get a consolation prize. Halfway through his first term, on the 4th of July in 2019, he held what he called a salute to America in front of the Lincoln Memorial. Basically, he gave a speech, a stationary speech, and he did have tanks, but they were not tanks rolling by. They were also stationary tanks. In fact, the closest thing to a parade that day was the convoy that was required to get the tanks into position, because the tanks had to be carried toward the memorial on semi-trucks and then carefully rolled off the trucks onto a series of strategically placed wooden planks where they put them on little platforms so they wouldn't break anything. That was it. Tanks on semi-trucks and then on little plinths. That was it. His whole first term, Trump never got the big military parade he wanted. Now, of course, he's trying again. The Army now says it is planning a military parade, complete with more than 6,000 soldiers and, you guessed it, tanks. It is still unclear if those tanks will be rolling or stationary or on the back of semi-trucks, maybe. But the whole spectacle is set for the 250th anniversary of the founding of the U.S. Army, which also happens to be the president's own birthday, June 14th. And if that news makes you want to be somewhere, anywhere else, is happening that day at more than 100 locations around the country thus far. I have a feeling there's going to be more than that. A coalition of groups, including Indivisible and Social Security Works and 5051, they are all organizing a nationwide day of protest for June 14th. They're calling it No King's Day. As they put it on their website, quote, Donald Trump wants tanks in the street and a made-for-TV display of dominance for his birthday, a spectacle meant to look like strength. But real power isn't staged in Washington. It rises up everywhere else. Joining us now is Ezra Levin, co-founder and co-executive director of Indivisible. Ezra, it's nice to see you this evening. Thanks very much for making time.
Great to see you, Rachel.
So we've spent a lot of time covering sort of the character and the effect of protests of all kinds around the country. A lot of those organized through Indivisible, a lot of them organized through 5051 and other groups. What is
Look, Donald Trump wants to spend tens of millions of taxpayer dollars to throw himself a big fancy parade with tanks in the streets. And on one level, this is ridiculous, right? But he is doing this for a reason. This is straight out of the authoritarian playbook. He wants to project strength. He wants everybody to think that he is all-powerful, that he rules the world. He doesn't. He doesn't. As we said on that website, look, real power is not in D.C. It's distributed all across the country. And what we're looking to do on No King's Day is to say, look, Donald Trump does not own the flag. He does not own patriotism. In fact, to a king in this country. And this isn't about any individual organization. This is about all of us. Whether you are from the faith community, whether you're a veteran, whether you're an activist, whether you're a teacher, you can be part of this. That, as you mentioned, there are 100 events so far. This has been up for the weekend, available to register events. I would expect over 1,000. We saw 1,100 for May Day protests. We saw over 1,300 events all across the world for April 5th hands off. If you are watching this right now and you are thinking, well, I don't want a king in this country, good news, neither do we. And you can be part of this. Look up, see You are going to be the organizer for an event in your community. We need them in rural communities. We need them in urban communities. We need them in red states and purple states and blue states. Ultimately, this comes down to all of us. We have got to do the work to show that, yes, this is a constitutional republic, and a constitutional republic has no kings.
Ezra, over the course of the first 100 days of Trump in office, I feel like what I saw as the effect of protests were sort of two things. First of all, because the protests weren't just one big protest one day in Washington or one big day in New York or something like that, but because the protests were constant and happening so frequently and happening in literally every state in the country, and I'd say over time in almost every town of any size, and some towns of no size. Because they happen in so many places, one of the effects was that a lot of Republican members of Congress and senators found themselves confronted by their own constituents about stuff that Trump was doing that they themselves, as elected Republicans, couldn't defend and couldn't explain, and felt like they had to ultimately say, okay, I side with my constituents on this. And that drove a lot of caving in Washington in terms of what Trump was trying to do. But then the other thing that I saw happen is that I think the large numbers of protests over time happening all over the place created a sort of culture in which it was shameful. Whether they're law firms or billionaires or business interests or anybody else, or Republican electeds or anybody else, or even Democratic electeds who were thinking about sort of cozying up to Trump, looked at this footage and looked at what was going on in these communities and looked at these large protests and felt like, you know what those people are asking for is probably the right side of history, and I don't feel comfortable staying on the other side of that. I felt like it created a cultural dynamic in which it was embarrassing to be siding with Trump. That's what I've been seeing, just covering this stuff in order to tell people about the news over these past 100 days. I wanted to ask for your reaction to those observations and ask, as somebody who's been involved really right in the middle of this, if you feel like the impact has been something other than that.
Look, you are exactly right. What we are doing with mass protest, mass peaceful protest in communities red, blue, and purple around the country is not just showing up for the sake of showing up. We're showing up to send a message to everybody else who is looking to their left and looking to their right and trying to decide, what do I do? And as you said, this is law firms, this is universities, this is businesses. People are trying to understand, is this guy for real? Is he in power forever? Do I have to adjust to this new reality permanently? Or will there be a new day of accountability that follows the Trump administration? And by showing up en masse repeatedly, month after month, week after week, day after day, in many cases, what we are doing is sending a very strong signal to those businesses, those universities, those law firms that, oh, I can't actually just cover myself today or next week because this guy's going to be out soon. He's an unpopular, lame duck president, and there is going to be a future post-Trump era, and I'm still going to be a law firm. I'm still going to be a business. I'm still going to be a university. I'm going to have to contend with my actions today. So the smart move stops being, I'm going to cover myself today, and it becomes, I've got to think about what comes next.
That's right. We all should be thinking about that all the time in terms of it, explaining ourselves to ourselves in the mirror and to future generations about what we did in this moment. Ezra Levin, co-founder and co-executive director of Indivisible. Mr. Levin, thank you for your time tonight. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Rachel.
All right, more news ahead tonight. Stay with us. Here's something new. Today we learned that hackers claim to have hacked into the computer systems of the airline that operates many. The company is called Global X, and their flights for the Trump administration include those 3 plane loads of men who were flown from the U.S. to El Salvador last month. In March. Those 3 flights, famously, were the ones that a federal judge ordered must be turned around and flown back to the United States. That's an order the Trump administration did not obey. Well, today, 404 Media reports that they are in contact with a hacking group that claims to have hacked into Global X and taken, among other things, their flight records and passenger manifests for all the deportation flights that Global X has operated for the Trump administration. 404 Media says, as far as they can tell, the data appears to be genuine. But that's not the only major hack that 404 Media has brought to light just in the last day or so. You remember Mike Waltz, Trump National Security Advisor, who group chat about war plans in Yemen. You may have seen reports last week that at the cabinet meeting at the White House on Wednesday, Mr. Waltz was caught on camera by a Reuters photographer using his personal phone, or using his phone at least, at that cabinet meeting and appearing like he was still using something that looked very much like Signal to chat with multiple high-ranking government officials. The news photographer was actually able to capture the text of some of his messages on what appeared to be the Signal app that he was using during the cabinet meeting in front of a bunch of news reporters. Now, I say it looked like the Signal app. It wasn't the original Signal app. It was a different version of Signal called Telemessage, made by a different company that appears to be considerably less secure than Signal. Sure enough, 404 Media now reports that that app, Telemessage, has also just been hacked. NBC News, meanwhile, was contacted by a different, entirely separate hacker who also claims to have hacked this telemessage operations, which is going to be so inconvenient for the whole Trump administration national security apparatus that was apparently using it amongst themselves. So that's all going well. Of course, Mike Waltz is no longer Trump's national security advisor. He was fired and replaced by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who is also simultaneously the archivist of the United States now and the acting administrator as well. Which tells you just how seriously Donald Trump takes all those jobs, right? If he thought any one of those jobs was a real job, he wouldn't give the person holding that job lots of other jobs too. In fact, not only does Donald Trump not that big a deal, the Washington Post now reports that some senior White House officials are, quote, questioning the need for a traditional National Security Council at all. So, National Security Advisor behaving the way we know Mike Waltz has, National Security Advisor being fired, National Security Council all going away? The whole White House National Security Council, that whole apparatus? Really? You guys don't see the need for it? At which point you might want somebody who worked in the White House to explain the consequences of something like that. Well, luckily, your new 9 p.m. Eastern host here on MSNBC, Tuesday through Friday, starting tomorrow, has definitely worked in the White House, and she understands these things and many others. Joining us now, I'm very pleased to say, is my colleague, Jen Psaki, former White House press secretary, and starting tomorrow, the host of this 9 p.m. hour here on MSNBC, the host of The Briefing with Jen Psaki, here 9 p.m. Eastern, Tuesday to Friday. Jen, it is great to see you. Congratulations on the new gig. How are you feeling?
It's great to be here. I am feeling all of the feelings at once. I'm excited. I read to the depths of the internet, which is not productive. I've listened to every podcast of every person who's going to appear on the show. And I'm just excited. And I'm so delighted to be here with you tonight. You're such an inspiration to me and everybody watching, I know. And I can promise everybody, I know we'll talk about serious things, that you have shined such a light in the first 100 days, Rachel, on such an important part of what's happening right now. We are going to continue to do that. I care about the story like you care about the story. And thank you for doing that, because it's been a little dose of hope and inspiration for me watching, too, as I know it has been for everyone out there.
Well, it's part of what I wanted to talk to you about tonight, because I feel like one of the things that we have had to sort of calibrate and rebalance over the first 100 days is, like, where does news... saying this about one of your successors, but the news is not really happening in the White House briefing room. Like, that's not a place where people are getting, like, you can take it to the bank. It's not the room where it happens. No, it's not take it to the bank information. And we're not getting news and information from the White House other than sort of proclamations and provocations and occasional scandals. A lot of what we're learning about in terms of the most important stuff of the government is happening not just in Washington, but not on the coasts and not on the interstate. It's where the destruction of the government meets the American people. It's the messed up Social Security field office. It is the VA office where people can't get their medical appointments done with any sort of privacy. It's the Social Security checks running late. It's the Head Start offices closing. It's Meals on Wheels being shut down. And I wanted to know how you're feeling about that with so much White House experience and Washington experience about how we should be thinking about the aperture of where news comes from and where trusted sources of information come from in an environment that's this toxic in your former workplace.
Well, I've learned a couple things from you and a number of other people who've done this for a long time. And one is you can't cover every single story every night. And so I'm not going to attempt to do that. But I think we've also learned a lot about what Donald Trump tries to do. He tries to flood the zone, but he also analogy, but just take in the last 24 hours. I mean, he announced he wants to reopen Alcatraz. The prompting and what motivated that, here we are. At the same time, to your point, and just to keep with your theme of Social Security, what we need to be reading the fine print on, I know you are and I will be, is what he is doing to the Social Security system and administration. It's cutting offices. He's also trying to gain access to people's private information and personal data. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to not follow the shiny ball. You always say, don't let him jerk your chain, I think is what you say, but not follow the things he's trying to get us to pay attention to and to dig deeper into the things that he maybe doesn't want us to talk about. And so every day you have to make choices and decisions, as you well know. I know you've been making them hard ones many days.
Yeah. Jen Psaki, the new show is called The Briefing with Jen Psaki. It premieres tomorrow night at 9 p.m. Eastern. Attendance is mandatory for everybody watching right now. Jen, as I understand it, your first guest is going to be former Transportation Secretary and varsity for everybody in the media and political commentary who keeps calling Donald Trump a populist. When you are a baby girl that is 11 years old, you do not need 30 dolls. President Donald J. Trump, quote, I don't think that a beautiful baby girl that's 11 years old, needs to have 30 dolls. I think they can have 3 dolls or 4 dolls because what we were doing with China was just unbelievable. We had a trade deficit of hundreds of billions of dollars with China. President telling NBC News, quote, I'm just saying they don't need to have 30 dolls. They can have 3. They don't need to have 250 pencils. They can have 5. 3 dolls, 5 pencils. And you'd be grateful if you get that, American child. Donald Trump told reporters on Air Force One yesterday, quote, all I'm saying is that a young lady, a 10-year-old girl, 9-year-old girl, 15-year-old girl, doesn't need 37 dolls. She could be very happy with 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. So now that is how many dolls? 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. Who gets 5 dolls when some people only get 2 dolls? The president has recently mused publicly that he does not care if the price of cars goes up. He does not care if we have a recession. He does not care if small businesses want relief from the tariffs. He does not care if strollers cost more. He called them, you know, the thing you put the baby in. But there's more to being president than not worrying about the price of cars or causing a recession or even setting important policy on dolls and pencils. At the top of his supposedly populist agenda this week, as of today, President Donald Trump is sicking collection agencies on Americans whose student loans aren't paid up to date. This is a change from the policies of President Biden. The Trump administration, as of today, has sent out the first notices that the Treasury is going to start taking away tax refunds and then siphoning your wages if you do not pay up on student loans. 5 million Americans are in default on their student loans already. Millions more Americans are on the verge of default on their student loans. And now Trump is handing these millions of Americans over to the tender ministrations of collections agencies. You ever had a collections agency come after you? Remind me, please, what populism is. Somehow 3 dolls, 5 pencils, and a pounding on the door from the collection agency is not how I imagined it. I'm going to be in Boston on Wednesday, day after tomorrow. There's still some tickets available for that in Boston. I'm going to be on Long Island Friday night. There are still a few tickets there as well. If you'd like to go, you can find all the information and get tickets at msnbc.com/prequel. Also, tomorrow night, I'm going to be on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. And so I'll see you Colbert tomorrow. See you on the road this week. See you back here Monday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. And now it is time for the last word with Lawrence O'Donnell. Good evening, Lawrence.
Good evening, Rachel. Did you say Boston day after tomorrow? Mm-hmm. I need more advance notice than that, Rachel. Okay, well, maybe I won't be there this time. If that's what you were trying to achieve, it worked. I hope you're very proud of yourself.
I'm not doing it in secret. I'm not trying to do it. Nobody tell Lawrence. That doesn't work in Boston.
Rachel, you were just talking about Donald Trump and the 11-year-old girl who might also be an infant baby, it's hard to tell, and the 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 dolls that they might have. As you know, the last real wartime president, in the sense that he was working with a declaration of war, was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And he had to make some very serious decisions, like how many gallons of gasoline you could buy, how many tires you could buy in a year, to make sure that the wartime economy was producing everything it needed for the military. But in a trade war, Donald Trump gets to decide how many dolls and how many pencils you get.
Also, the idea that he thinks that if you're raising a kid right now in 2025 in the United States of America, the thing you're most thinking about is pencils and dolls. That those are your real expenses that you're worried about. And those are going to be the kinds of liminal purchases that are not central to your family budget that might be affected by what he's doing. That's what he thinks the family budget is based around, is just a remarkable window into his mind.
The most charitable thing that can be said about that is that he's a 20th century guy. That's the most you can say.
Who's also working he's operating characters in The Sims, right? And, and nobody needs to eat or get health care. But what we have to worry about is our numbers of pencils and dolls. And I mean, are there any boys in this world that have to? I don't know. I can't. Anyway, I don't know.
You don't have to know, Rachel. We're just taking it one day at a time, trying to figure this out.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you. Well, one day in the basement of the Hart Senate office building, my life changed after I filled out an address and Social Security number form for my first real job. And just when I thought I was finished with everything I needed to do in that otherwise forgettable moment in a forgettable-looking office space, I was suddenly, and very much to my surprise, told to raise my right hand. I was then asked to repeat words that I had never heard before and have never forgotten. I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter, so help me God. Defend the Constitution of the United States. The weight of those words changed me as I spoke them. I had no idea that everyone working in the Senate, from the receptionists to the senators themselves, take the same oath of office, word for word. And in that instant, the job that I thought was going to be, at most, a temporary detour in my work life that I was probably ill-suited for, was by far, suddenly, the most important job that I would ever have. I knew that day, in that moment, with my hand raised, that the importance of my work was going to peak right there in the United States Senate in my 30s, because I knew that for the rest of my life, I could not possibly have a job as important as defending the Constitution of the United States. I knew I would never have another job that required me to take an oath of office. I worked in the Senate for several years and was promoted to other jobs within the Senate, but that first oath held throughout my career on the staff of the United States Senate. For the more committed Senate staffers, that oath holds for 30 years and sometimes longer, no matter how many times they change jobs within the Senate. And years later, in a TV drama that I created for NBC called Mr. Sterling, I gave those words to Josh Brolin for his oath of office scene as a new United States Senator with his father, played by the great James Whitmore, watching at home on TV. And in that scene, James Whitmore chose to silently mouth some of the words of the oath while holding back his tears. And I realized that James Whitmore expressed my feelings about the oath more eloquently than I ever could.
And that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter.
That I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter.
So help me God.
So help me God.
The presidential oath of office is shorter, but it ends with those same words: defend the Constitution of the United States. The presidential oath is, I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Donald Trump has taken that oath twice and was obviously unmoved by it. He also obviously did not listen to it, and he has proved that many times, but never more clearly than in an answer to Kristen Welker's question about due process for immigrants on Meet the Press. Don't you need to uphold the Constitution of the United States as president? To which Donald Trump said, I don't know.
Don't you need to uphold the Constitution of the United States as president?
I don't know. I have to respond by saying again, I have brilliant lawyers that work for me, and they are going to obviously follow what the Supreme Court said.
Only one president of the United States in American history could possibly have said, I don't know, to the question, do you need to uphold the Constitution of the United States as president? Every president prior to Donald Trump knew the answer to that question. They always knew the answer is one word: yes. Every one of them. Joe Biden took an oath of office more than any other president. He took an oath of office 10 times, 7 as a senator, twice as vice president, and once as president. And Joe Biden meant every word of that oath, including, very much so, the "so help me God" part of that oath. Joe Biden lived that oath of office. No president had more reverence for that oath than Joe Biden. And now, right after Joe Biden, we have a president who does not know what reverence is or what his oath means. Donald Trump talks about his predecessor in office more than any other president has ever talked about their predecessors. And in that same interview on Meet the Press, Donald Trump called President Biden, quote, a stupid person and a very stupid person. Donald Trump said at least one thing in the interview that was true.
Well, prices are already going up on some popular items.
Whoa.
Tires, strollers.
This is such a dishonest interview already.
When he's right, he's right. Donald Trump is the dishonest part of that interview. It was already a dishonest interview, made dishonest by Donald Trump, and it remained a dishonest interview in every reply Donald Trump gave. It was a standard Trump dishonest interview from start to finish, with Donald Trump lying at every turn, and with Donald Trump proving once again that he is, to use his words, a stupid person, a very stupid person. Donald Trump talks repeatedly in the interview about how much money we were losing because of international trade. We have never lost a penny because of international trade. Donald Trump said, quote, we were losing hundreds of billions of dollars with China. Now, think about how very stupid and dishonest that statement is. Donald Trump is counting every penny we spend on imported products as lost money. That means every time we spend money, we are losing money, according to that theory. Every one of Donald Trump's friends who arrive at his private club in Florida in their newest Mercedes or their newest Range Rover has, according to Donald Trump, just lost hundreds of thousands of dollars by buying that car. Donald Trump has always thought, apparently, that paying bills is losing money. That's why it's always been very difficult for people doing business with Donald Trump to get him to pay what he owes them. But according to Donald Trump's own economic theory of losing money, every time Donald Trump actually bought and paid for something, like a building, he lost money. That is his very stupid economic theory of international trade. If I buy a Ford, made in the United States, I haven't lost money. But if I buy a Kia made in South Korea, I have lost money, even if the Kia is cheaper than the Ford. What Donald Trump is incapable of understanding is that at the end of that transaction, my life is richer now because I have a car, which I did not have before I paid for that car. And now my kids can get to the soccer game and they can bring their friends with them. And there will be a lifetime of memories made because we own that car. It's going to take us to new places in our lives. We didn't lose the money by buying a car. According to Donald Trump, if you pay for something, you have lost money. That's his understanding of economics. And so every time Donald Trump says we were losing hundreds of billions of dollars with China, every word of that is a lie. We have never lost a penny in international trade. The only way we could lose money is if we don't get the product that we paid for. And that doesn't happen. That's not how international trade works. Because our system of international trade is, in fact, so reliable, so productive, and has made the world so productive, and has made this country more productive, and has made this country much richer than it was going to be if it ever had tried to remain an isolationist economic island in the middle of the world that was thriving in international trade. The rest of the world would be thriving in international trade. Donald Trump may have noticed that the nickname he got on this program last week, Donnie Two Dolls, after he said the stupidest thing any president of the United States has ever said about Christmas or dolls. Donald Trump apparently realizes how very stupid it was for him to say last week that little girls should just get used to having 2 dolls instead of 30 dolls that he imagines them all to have, since almost all of the dolls sold in the United States are made in China. Kristen Welker began the interview with that. And Donald Trump once again admitted that his tariffs are going to make prices go up, especially the price of dolls.
I'm going to quote what you said. Maybe the children will have 2 dolls instead of 30 dolls.
Yeah.
And maybe the 2 dolls will cost a couple of bucks more than they would normally. Are you saying that your tariffs will cause some prices to go up?
No, I think the tariffs are going to be great for us because it's going to make us rich.
But you said some dolls are going to cost more. Isn't that an...
Sure. Some dolls are going to cost more. Sure. That was something Donald Trump never admitted on the campaign trail when he lied about tariffs every time he spoke about them. And now, every time Donald Trump talks about tariffs, he sounds stupider than the time before. This time, in a line worthy of a mental competency exam, Donald Trump talked about a beautiful baby girl who he then said is 11 years old. Donald Trump is the only president in history who has decided exactly how many dolls a beautiful baby girl or an 11-year-old girl needs or should ever have. And while he's at it, he's decided how many pencils kids should have. Here's Donald Trump trying desperately to sound smarter than last week's Donnie Two Dolls, who said the very stupid thing about dolls last week. And he ends up sounding somewhere far beyond very stupid once again.
I don't think a beautiful baby girl that's 11 years old needs to have 30 dolls. I think they can have 3 dolls or 4 dolls. Because what we were doing with China was just unbelievable. We had a trade deficit of hundreds of billions of dollars with China.
When you say they could have 3 dolls instead of 30 dolls, are you saying Americans could see empty store shelves?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying they don't need to have 30 dolls. They can have 3. They don't need to have 250 pencils. They can have 5.
So in Donald Trump's new math, the price increases are going to be so high that the amount of money that used to buy you 30 dolls before the Trump tariffs will now only buy you 3. Donald Trump is saying that he's going to drive prices up by a factor of 10. And maybe the Trump kids have 250 pencils each, but I don't know anyone else who did. But I also know I couldn't possibly have gotten through a single grade of St. Brendan's Elementary School with only 5 pencils a year, if that's what he means. Do I get 5 pencils for my entire elementary school years, or is it 5 a year? We don't know. The mastermind of the last Republican President George W. Bush's election and re-election, Karl Rove, believes that Donald Trump becoming President Scrooge with 233 shopping days left before Christmas is very stupid and uniquely Trumpian stupid politics.
I thought it was really problematic when he said, well, you know what? The kids, those little girls at Christmas, they don't need $30. They can do it too. And if they have to pay a couple more bucks for them, okay. Well, it sounds like Mr. Scrooge. And the ordinary American is like, wait a minute, I thought you were on my side. I didn't think you were on the side of, saying I need to do with less. You got plenty of money. I got to make mine stretch as far as I can.
94-year-old Warren Buffett, who knows more about business and investing and economics than Donald Trump ever will. Warren Buffett, the self-made billionaire who was not born rich like Donald Trump, told his Berkshire Hathaway shareholders meeting in Omaha, Nebraska this weekend just how destructive Donald Trump is without ever saying the word Trump.
There's no question that trade can be an act of war, and I think it's led to bad things. Just the attitudes it's brought out in the United States. I mean, we should be looking to trade with the rest of the world, and we should do what we do best, and they should do what they do best. I do not think it's a great idea to try and design a world where a few countries say, ha, 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 we've won, and other countries are envious. So
that product sitting in front of Warren Buffett there, Coca-Cola, one of the huge beneficiaries of international trade, something Donald Trump doesn't understand. That was a largely Republican audience in Omaha, Nebraska, of serious investors applauding what Warren Buffett had to say about Donald Trump's insane trade war. Donald Trump's latest utter insanity on tariffs is about movies. In a social media post yesterday, Donald Trump said, I am authorizing the Department of Commerce and the United States Trade Representative to immediately begin the process of instituting a 100% tariff on any and all movies coming into our country that are produced in foreign lands. Now, that will never happen. It will allow for some interesting, fun TV interviews, I suppose, people from Hollywood who might be concerned about this, people in show business, but it is a complete waste of your time to even think about that very, very stupid statement by the President of the United States. No one at the Department of Commerce or the United States Trade Representative will even attempt to put that crazy idea in writing because it is impossible to put it in legal language for any purpose of a tariff. It is one of those idiotic Trump ideas that requires a depth of stupidity in its authorship that no one else in the history of American government possessed other than Donald Trump. Donald Trump's justification for this tariff idea on movies that will never be put in writing is that movies not made in the United States are you ready for this? I think we can all say this together by now. A national security threat. Those are Donald Trump's words. Movies are, according to Donald Trump, quote, a national security threat. Dolls are a national security threat. Washing machines are a national security threat. The President of the United States believes all of those things are national security threats. And the President does have an extremely limited authority to impose tariffs in response to a product that presents a national security threat to the United States. That's why he's calling movies a national security threat. The Trump movie tariff is so insane that it will never even find its way into a federal courtroom to be struck down instantaneously, as it would, because it is impossible to even write it. Even the most sycophantic Trump clowns working for him, to try to put that idiocy into legal language, even for them, is impossible. So Hollywood can relax. Movie theater operators don't have to worry. Moviegoers and movie watchers, there's nothing to see here. It's just more Trumpian nonsense. Never before in the immediate aftermath of the death of a pope have American politicians thought that the Pope's death is an opportunity for fun. a time to publicly make jokes about it. Sure, plenty of people make jokes about popes, including jokes about popes dying. Comedians, that's who does that. Anyone can do that. But politicians don't, because politicians are careful people. They don't want to offend anyone. They're not funny people. Politicians are not comedians, and they're not good at comedy. And Republicans are proving that in a totally new arena of what is now exclusively Republican comedy, and that is making jokes about the Pope and the papacy. Here's a couple of right-wing Republican Catholics playing in the comedic field opened to them, to their glee, by the death of a pope.
Now, on ex-Vice President J.D. Vance actually was very funny, remarking, quote, "I think he could take on a bit more. If only there was a job opening for a devout Catholic." When does conclave start? I think the 7th. Here now with more is Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Mr. Secretary, you got to admit, that was pretty funny. I like that.
You know, we thought about it, but you have to, it's an unmarried Catholic male. You don't have to be a priest. People don't know that. Any unmarried Catholic a male can be pope, but I got married and I'm happily married, so
I know you are. And by the way, you're
so funny. Sean Hannity got married and divorced and is on his way to getting married again, so he's going to miss out on that pope job too. And even if Marco Rubio had never married, the College of Cardinals would probably want someone with a stronger commitment to Catholicism than Marco Rubio, who was born Catholic, then as a kid, when his family moved to Nevada, became Mormon, then became a Catholic again when they moved back to Florida, and then became an evangelical Christian as his political career was blossoming in a party favored by evangelical Christians, and is now back to being a Catholic again. James David Vance, who has changed his name more than any vice president in history, changed his religion in 2019 to become a Catholic for the first time. Someone with only 6 years in Catholicism and no formal Catholic education might lack many Catholic sentiments, including possible outrage, when Donald Trump tweeted this picture of himself as Pope. Vice President Vance said, "I'm fine with people telling jokes." That was his reaction to Donald Trump's version of himself as Pope. It's a joke. No Republican has explained the joke. No Republican has attempted to explain what's funny about it. The religiously wandering Marco Rubio has said nothing about it. The Catholic bishops of New York State, which includes the Cardinal Archbishop of New York, Timothy Dolan, who has been very chummy with Donald Trump, said directly to Donald Trump publicly, "There is nothing clever or funny about this image, Mr. President. We just buried our beloved Pope Francis, and the cardinals are about to enter a solemn conclave to elect a new successor of St. Peter. Do not mock us." Donald Trump is too ignorant to know this, of course, but there was a very strong strain of anti-Catholic bias and bigotry in American politics from colonial times well into the second half of the 20th century. Mocking Catholics and mocking cardinals was acceptable in much of America through most of our history, and acceptable from politicians. But for a politician to do that today would make that politician a very stupid person. Remember, politicians are supposed to try to treasure voter support, which is why they don't live by the rules of stand-up comedians. The religious outrage that Donald Trump invited with that picture is just very stupid politics. But what is most important about that picture has nothing to do with religion or Catholicism or the papacy. What is so horrifying about that picture is the mental capacity of the president that is on display in that picture. That is the picture that Donald Trump decided to display of himself around the same time that he was saying, "I don't know," when asked, "Don't you need to uphold the Constitution of the United States as president?" That is not a picture of a man who has bad taste. Donald Trump has been a vulgarian with bad taste his entire life. That is a picture that the 25th Amendment was created to deal with. The 25th Amendment was written to deal with a disabled president incapable of carrying out his duties because of physical or mental disability. Any other vice president and cabinet for any other president would have immediately convened a discussion of invoking the 25th Amendment if that president ever put out a picture of himself like that. The vice president and the majority of the cabinet can vote to remove the president from office and install the vice president as the acting president as long as the president is disabled. The 25th Amendment was adopted in 1967. The authors of the amendment knew that establishing that the president was mentally disabled might not be easy, might not be clear, but if Pope Paul VI had died in 1967, and President Lyndon Johnson put out a picture of himself as Pope, like the one Donald Trump did, every member of Congress in both parties, every member of Lyndon Johnson's cabinet would have unanimously agreed that the president had lost his mind. Today in the Oval Office, Donald Trump said, the Catholics loved it. The only Catholic who claimed to like it was Donald Trump's vice president, who has been a Catholic only the last 6 of his 40 years of life. The man who exhibits economic dementia every time he talks about tariffs said the Catholics loved it. The man who can't remember his oath of office when asked about it in a television interview said the Catholics loved it. After the bishops told Donald Trump directly, do not mock us, Donald Trump said the Catholics loved it. You can never know what stupidity is going to do next. It always surprises you. It's impossible to anticipate stupidity because it has no logic. It is disconnected from reality. I was not expecting Donald Trump to post a picture of himself as Pope. How could I expect that? How could anyone expect that? Stupidity without power can be easily ignored, but when stupidity has power and you never know what it's going to do next, then you can always feel the danger of that stupidity. And you have to live with the fear of not knowing what's next from someone who could hurt you. Donald Trump has hurt a lot of people. Donald Trump and Elon Musk literally have taken food away from starving children in the middle of a famine in Sudan. They have taken life-saving medicine away from people around the world, especially people in poverty in Africa. They have sent people who have committed no crimes to a prison in El Salvador. Donald Trump is doing all of this, heaping cruelty on top of cruelty without really knowing what he's doing. And that picture of Donald Trump as Pope, that picture of Donald Trump taking the job that is, at its very essence, a permanent statement against cruelty in the modern world. That is a picture of someone who has no idea what he's doing and never will, because he has never shown the mental capacity to understand his very simple oath of office to defend the Constitution of the United States. We'll be right back.
Why'd I go to the doctor?